The next number of changes that we are going to make are going to be to our router login methods. Now, there are two ways of logging into a router. The next part that we're going to configure is how are the ports that we use to connect to a router. So we're going to make configuration changes to ports that we use to log into a router. Now, one of the ports that is used to log into a router is called the console port, which connects the console port of a router through a console cable to the back end or the communications port at the back end of a PC. Now, what does a console cable look like? Well, there it is. So this RJ45 connector that you see, this connector is called a registered jack or RJ45. Your regular phones use an RJ11. This goes into the console port of a router, and this goes into that serial-looking port at the back of your PC that says COM1 and COM2, either one. So the rule of thumb for Cisco devices, as far as ports go, is to make changes to a port, you must first go into the port. Makes sense. If I ask anybody to make changes to a room inside of a house, they first have to enter the room, don't they? So logically speaking, it makes sense that to make changes to a port, you must first enter that port. Now, to enter the console port of a router, I will say line. If I can type, console 0, and hit enter. Now, I know that I'm in my console port because my prompt changed to config-line. Now, the first change to the console port I'm going to make, and be aware, when I make changes to the console port, these changes are only going to affect people that are connected to the router through the console port. If they are connected to the router through any other means, these changes do not apply to those people. These changes apply to people that connect to this router through the console port. So, the first command we're going to do is exec-timeout. Then, if I press question mark, it asks me timeouts in minutes. So let's say I set the timeout to 2 minutes, space, question mark, and then it says timeout in seconds, and I say 20, and I hit enter. Now, what this command does, well, let's change the timeout to 0:20. So what this command does is it controls your automatic console logout. So if you're logged into a router, and let's say you walk away from your table where you're logged into a router and you go get coffee. Technically, what should have happened is you log out of that router and then you go get coffee. Because you don't leave a console session open like that, again, because somebody malicious, as you walk away, could jump on your router and do something bad. So, this exec timeout command controls the number of minutes and seconds of inactivity after which you automatically get logged out. So when I set exec timeout to 2 minutes, 20 seconds, after 2 minutes, 20 seconds of inactivity, after 2 minutes, 20 seconds of me not pressing any keys, I will get automatically logged out. Then I set the exec timeout, I changed it to 0 minutes, 20 seconds. And as I was talking, see what happened. The router automatically kicked me out. This is a safeguard for if you forget to log out of a router when you walk away from your desk or a Cisco device as you walk away from your desk, it will automatically log you out and quite possibly maybe save your job. It is a security feature. So I have to log back in and go to my priv mode by typing in enable. As you see, I only typed in EN, and that works just fine. Then I typed in the password Bob, then configure terminal, then back to line console 0. Now, in this class, there might be times where I'm talking and I'm logged into the console and I'm talking for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and I believe the default logout time is, automatic logout time is 3 minutes. I don't want to get logged out constantly and have to log back in. So I got logged back out because I talked for 20 seconds. So exec timeout 00. Now, by saying exec timeout 00, I have turned the automatic console log off feature off. Now, you might say, Junaid, you said to negate a command, all you have to do is put a no in front of it. Okay, no exec timeout does the same thing. So exec timeout 00 will turn off your automatic logout feature, and so does no exec timeout. And we want it this way in this class for, we don't want to constantly be getting timed out and then logged out and have to log back in again. Now, the next feature I'm going to discuss, I'm going to hit end and pop back into priv mode to show you something. So I hit end and I hit enter once. I press the enter key one time. You see that this message showed up, configured from console by console. Okay? Configured from console by console. Basically telling me I've made some configuration changes to the console by the console. Now, after that, I don't see my R1 prompt. I should see this, R1 £. I don't see it. So if at this time I'm typing, I know that's gibberish, I'm effectively typing at the end of this line without having started a new line. Now, let's see what happens. I'm going to go back into my console port. Let's see what happens if I execute the command logging synchronous. If I say logging synchronous and I hit enter, and then I say end again to go back to priv mode, and I hit enter, you see this time the router started me a new line, for I see a new prompt, as previously I did not see a new prompt. Now, what the logging synchronous command does, technically, in technical words, is it keeps console logging messages, these messages that show up every now and then when you make changes to a router. So it keeps console logging messages from interrupting your typing. You're interrupting your command line. If you don't have this logging synchronous in place, there would be instances where you are typing part of a command, and if it's a really long command, you're typing part of a command, and in the middle, this message pops up, configured from console by console, and then you're left typing the other half of the command after this line, which makes it confusing. So logging synchronous just makes your command line a lot cleaner by keeping logging console messages from interrupting your typing. Let's go back to our console port, config terminal to go back to my config mode, and then line console 0 to go back to my console port. And now I'm going to set a console level password. So I'm going to say password, and let's just make this Cisco also. Let's make it CCNA. And enter. And what type of password am I setting? I am setting a login type password. So you put that on a separate line because there are other types of passwords that I can set over here. Login is not the only type of passwords. I'm not going to go into what they are. You will learn that when you go to your CCNP. Now, let's test this out, as the rule being, as soon as we make a change to a router, we test it out immediately. And this time, instead of hitting end, remember, every time I hit end, it took me straight back to privilege mode. Control Z has basically the same effect as end. It takes you immediately back to privilege mode. This time around, I'm going to say exit. And it took me back to config mode. So end, no matter where you are, will pop you all the way back to priv mode. Exit, on the other hand, will pop me back one mode at a time. So when I said exit, it took me back to config mode, and if I say exit again, it'll take me back to privilege mode. Now let's just go ahead and log completely out of the router. And I'm logged completely out of the router. Now, when I hit return or when I hit enter, I'm going to try and log back in. So here I go. It asked me for a login password. Now, in effect, when I hit enter, I'm starting a console session, and I have set a console password to CCNA. I hit enter, and I'm in the router, but I'm in user mode. Then, to go from user mode to privilege mode, I type in enable. I hit enter, and it's asking me for the enable password, which I believe was Bob. And I hit enter again, and I'm inside of privilege mode. So now I have full access to the router. All right, I'm going to go back to my config mode or global config mode by typing configure terminal. And now the second way of logging into a router is through remote login. So one of the ways of remotely logging into a router is Telnet. Another way would be SSH. These things we will cover later on in the class. But basically, the remote login feature in a router does not have a physical port. Because remote logins, usually, you're using an IP address to log into a device that might be sitting in another country or in another city or the building across the street. So the remote login feature does not have any physical ports on the router. However, they are assigned virtual ports or virtual lines inside of a router. So for remote login feature, you type in line VTY. The VTY, I believe, stands for virtual teletype. Then if I hit question mark, there are a total of 16 ports you can think of, or 16 lines that are available for remote login. Line 0 through 15, 0 inclusive. That gives me 16 lines. Now, I could do these one at a time. I could say line VTY 0, enter, and do some commands for it. And then line VTY 1, enter, and do some commands for it. Or I could do the whole range by saying 0 space 15 and hitting enter. So right now, my prompt changed to config line, but I am configuring lines or ports. You can think of them as either 0 through 15. At this time, you will see all my commands. For example, exec timeout. Let's just set this to 5 or 10 minutes. Timeout. Minutes are 10. Seconds are 0. So I set the exact timeout for my remote login lines or ports to 10 minutes. Then, same thing, logging synchronous. It does the same thing that it did for the console port, as in it keeps console messages from interrupting my command line. So, however, these commands only apply at this point to people that are remotely logged in to the router. So this 10-minute timeout does not apply to people that are consoled in through the console port. For them, the timeout is 00, which means the feature is turned off. For people that are remotely logging in, their timeout is 10 minutes. Then the logging synchronous command is the same. After that, I'm going to set a password. Let's set this the same to CCNA. And then the type of password it's a login password. Now, I want to look at my RAM again, or my running config, the configuration changes that I have made to my lab up until now. Now, remember we did the show running config command from privilege mode previously? I can do that same command from this mode by typing in do. Just putting a do in front of the show command. Do show running config. When I hit enter, I see my previous configs that I had done, and I'm going to scroll using the enter key. I'm just holding down the enter key. You can, using the enter key, for every enter I press, I scroll one line. Using the space bar, for every time I press it, I scroll up one page. So here are the changes I've made. I have my line con 0, which is my line console 0. My exact timeout is 00. My password is CCNA. I have logging synchronous, and the type of password it is login. It's a login password. And the commands I executed for the line VTY 0 through 15 are broken down in segments or ports of 5, 0 through 4, and then 5 through 15. And all the commands are there. Now, unfortunately here, you still see your login password CCNA as exposed, and your remote login passwords at CCNA as exposed in clear text, which again is not a good thing. So, there's a command to fix that. Is not a good thing. So, there's a command to fix that. I type in exit and go back one mode to my global config mode. And then I say service password encryption. So service password hyphen encryption, and I hit enter. Let's look at our running config again, or our RAM. Do show running config. You will notice that that original Cisco that was visible is encrypted. Scrolling to the end, where my console port and my VTY lines are, the CCNA password has also been encrypted. So, this command, service password encryption, make note of it, could be a test question. It encrypts all current and future passwords. Okay? The service password command encrypts all current and future passwords. All right. Now, at this point, I'm not going to do it, but if I were to power cycle this router, I would lose everything, because everything is only sitting in my running config. If I look at my startup config, what does it say? Startup config is not present. I haven't saved anything yet. There's nothing in there. So, to save my work, I execute the command copy, then the source file name, which is my running config, and then the destination file name, which is my startup config. So I can copy my running config to my startup config. I hit enter, and it asks me, should I really do this? And I enter again, and it says building configuration. Now, if I check for my startup config by executing the command show startup config, you see I have a startup config which matches my running configuration at this point. Now, during the course of this command, during the course of this class, the show startup config to, copy running config to startup config is too long. The copy running config startup config command is too long, for me at least. The copy run start, I could have just said copy run, copy run, which stands for running config, short for running config, to start. We'll do it too, still too long. So, for the purposes of the test, please remember the copy running, if I could type, running config to startup config command for the exam. Remember this for the exam. But later on, when we are covering other stuff and I need to quickly save, I'm going to do the command write memory. It does the same as copy running config to startup config. Actually, I'm going to shorten write memory to just WR and hit enter, and it does the same thing. Saves me time and saves us a bit of headache from me fat fingering the long version of the command. However, the long version of copy running config to startup config, you need to remember for the exam. This concludes what I call the housekeeping portion of this class, of the configuration section for this class.